Your house cat's ancestors almost killed the Roman Empire. Welcome back to Blank M. Today's file: an empire, a warehouse full of grain, and the small animal nobody thought to take seriously enough. The Roman Empire didn't fall because of a single battle. It didn't fall because of one bad emperor or one lost war. In one of its darkest chapters, it was brought to its knees by something almost embarrassingly small, an animal barely 6 inches long, hiding in a warehouse full of wheat. And the strange part? The one creature that might have stopped it, the cat, was sitting right there in the empire the entire time. Rome just didn't trust it the way Egypt did. This is the story of grain, rats, weasels, and the plague that may have done more damage to Rome than any army ever did. To understand how close this came to catastrophe, you have to understand what actually kept Rome alive: bread. Not glory, not legions, grain. By the height of the empire, Rome was a city of roughly 1 million people, and almost none of the food that fed them was grown nearby. Instead, an entire logistical system called the annona shipped grain across the Mediterranean from Egypt and North Africa, the empire's breadbaskets. Massive fleets sailed every year, timed around a narrow shipping season, hauling wheat to feed the capital. That grain didn't go straight to people's tables. It went into enormous warehouses called horia, some of them longer than a football field, where it sat for months, waiting to be distributed. And anywhere humans pile up that much food in one place, something else always shows up uninvited. Here's the twist most people don't expect: Rome had cats. But Rome didn't really trust them the way Egypt did. While Egyptians treated cats as sacred, almost inseparable from grain storage itself, Romans leaned instead on a different animal for pest control: the weasel. Weasels were kept specifically to hunt down the mice and rats that threatened stored grain, doing a version of the job cats would later become famous for. Ferrets, once domesticated more widely, took over that role in later centuries. Cats existed in Roman life. They show up in mosaics, in funerary art, occasionally as pets of the wealthy, but they were never woven into the food supply system with anything like Egyptian intensity. They were a convenience, not a strategy. Which meant Rome's single greatest vulnerability, its dependence on centralized grain storage, was defended by an inconsistent patchwork of weasels, ferrets, occasional cats, and sheer luck. That patchwork was about to be tested by something no one in the empire could have predicted. In the year 541 CE, ships loaded with grain sailed out of Egypt toward Constantinople, the capital of what was, at that point, still very much considered the Roman Empire. It was a route that had operated for centuries. Nothing about it looked unusual. But somewhere in Egypt's crowded grain warehouses, a disease had jumped from wild rodent populations into the black rats that infested those same stores of wheat. And those rats didn't stay in Egypt. They climbed aboard the grain ships, because grain ships were, from a rat's perspective, floating 5-star buffet. By the time the ships reached Constantinople, they weren't just carrying wheat. They were carrying infected fleas, riding on infected rats, headed straight into the most densely populated city in the empire. What followed is now known as the Plague of Justinian, and by some estimates it killed close to half the population of the Byzantine world before it finally burned out over the following 2 centuries. At its worst, contemporary accounts describe thousands of deaths a day in Constantinople alone, with bodies stacked in the streets because there was no room left to bury them. This wasn't a battlefield casualty count. This was a rodent infestation in a grain warehouse turning into one of the deadliest pandemics in recorded history. And the damage didn't stop with the dead. With farmers dying in the countryside, crops went untended. Grain prices spiked in the capital. Tax revenue collapsed just as the empire was pouring money into wars of reconquest in Italy and North Africa, and into massive building projects like the Hagia Sophia. The empire that had once projected unstoppable strength was suddenly bleeding from a wound almost no one saw coming, one that started in a granary. Now, to be fair to the historians, nobody credibly argues that Rome didn't like cats enough is a standalone explanation for any of this. The scholarship is more careful than that. Climate researchers have pointed to a period of severe volcanic cooling in the 530s, sometimes called the Late Antique Little Ice Age, that disrupted harvests and may have pushed rodent populations closer to human settlements in the first place. War, taxation, An imperial overreach all mattered too. But the mechanism connecting the granaries to the pandemic isn't in dispute. Massive stores of grain created massive rodent populations, and Rome's pest control for those granaries was never as rigorous or symbolically central as Egypt's. It's not that cats alone could have stopped a bubonic plague outbreak. No one could have, with what people knew in the 6th century. It's that the entire granary system the empire depended on for survival was, structurally, an open invitation to exactly the kind of infestation that eventually helped cripple it. Here's the detail that makes this sting a little more. The empire that treated cats as expendable mouses was, at the very same time, absorbing cats from the empire that had treated them as sacred. Cats had already spread across Roman territory by ship and trade route, arriving from Egypt and the eastern Mediterranean centuries earlier. They were right there. Rome just never fully committed to them the way its own breadbasket province had. It's a strange kind of historical near-miss. Not a single moment where disaster could have been avoided, but a slow accumulation of small choices: which animal to trust, how tightly to guard a warehouse, how seriously to take an infestation, that quietly compounded until an empire was on its knees. Picture a sailor in 541 CE, walking the deck of a grain ship somewhere between Alexandria and Constantinople. Maybe there's a cat on board too. There usually was, on ships, because rats destroyed cargo. Maybe that cat catches a few rats that night and never knows it. Maybe it doesn't catch enough. Nobody on that ship is thinking about empires. They're just moving wheat, the way sailors had for centuries. Today, we keep cats because they're charming, not because civilization depends on them. But there was a version of history, not that long ago, in the scale of things, where the difference between a well-fed capital and a collapsing empire came down to something as small as how seriously you took the animal guarding your grain. Your cat, asleep on the couch right now, is a descendant of the same species that once stood, sometimes successfully, sometimes not, between humanity and disaster. So the next time your cat knocks something off a table at 3 in the morning for no reason, just remember: its ancestors once had a job to do. And an empire that didn't take that job seriously enough paid for it. File closed. But it never really is it? The internet's always got another one open. If you're the type who needs to know how the small things quietly run the world, this is where you stay. Subscribe, and keep the investigation going. Because somewhere out there, another small, harmless thing has already changed history, and we're about to go find it. Stay tuned.